My name is Odette Palmer, and I was 34 the autumn my whole family decided I was a thief. It started with a phone call. My mother didn't bother saying hello. She said, "Just move some of Daddy's money over, Eddie. The bank won't wait." My grandfather had been dead 8 weeks. I told her no. I said it the same way I tell a client their quarterly numbers. Calm, quiet, no apology in it. No. Saying it was the easy part. What my mother did the next morning is the part I still can't quite believe. By the end of that week, 23 relatives were certain I had robbed a dead man. And my own mother was standing in a farmhouse kitchen, asking me in front of every one of them, "Where's Daddy's money, Odette?" Welcome back to Ashes of Inheritance, where quiet stories about ordinary people who hold the line when family pushes too far and find their footing with grace instead of noise. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I keep books for a living. 3 of them technically: a vet clinic, the seed co-op, and a roofing contractor who still hands me receipts in a coffee can. I'm good at it. I went to community college at night for it. Built my client list one handshake at a time, and I've never once been late filing. People think bookkeeping is boring. I think it's the closest thing we have to telling the truth on paper. My grandfather understood that. Harold Palmer, how to everyone in Brant Mill, farmed 300 acres off Route 19 until his knees quit. And even then, he wouldn't let anybody else near his ledgers. Anybody but me. For 8 years, every Sunday after lunch, I drove out to the farm, and we did his books together at the oak kitchen table, the one with the pale ring worn into it, where his coffee mug had sat for 40 years. He'd point at a column with a yellow pencil and say, "Numbers don't lie, Eddie. People do." I used to laugh at that. I don't anymore. When his mind started slipping, he signed a durable power of attorney and named me his executor because he said I was the only one who'd keep it straight. He died in September. I was still settling his estate, doing it by the book, the way he taught me when my mother decided the book was the problem. Here's the thing. Nobody in my family ever stopped to ask. If I was the one who kept every record for 8 years, why on earth would I be the one afraid of the records? The call I told you about came on a Tuesday. My mother, Brenda, has a particular voice she uses when she's already decided how a conversation is going to end. She used it that morning. "Eddie, we're going to lose the house." She said, "You can fix it. Just move some of Daddy's money over before the bank does something." I sat down. I asked her how far behind they were. 4 months, she admitted, like it was my fault for asking. Then the rest came out in a rush. The second mortgage, $9,000, the one she and my father had taken 3 years ago. I knew about it. The whole town did. They'd borrowed against their own home to bail out my brother Wade's heating and cooling business, the one that folded anyway 18 months later. Daddy would want family taken care of, she said. He'd want the house saved. Maybe he would have, but that wasn't the question, and she knew it. "Mom," clears throat. I said, "I can't just take money out of Grandpa's estate to pay your mortgage. Can't or won't. Can't." She went quiet. The kind of quiet that costs you later. I thought we'd hung up on an understanding. I should have known better. My mother doesn't hear no, she hears not yet. And the next morning, she went looking for a different way to get to yes, one that didn't need my signature at all. She called back that afternoon, and this time my father was on the line too, breathing but not talking the way he does. I tried to explain it plainly, the way I'd explain it to a client. "An estate isn't a checking account," I said. "I'm the executive, which means the law treats Grandpa's money as something I hold in trust, not something I own, and not something I can spend on whoever asks. If I pulled funds to pay off a mortgage that wasn't even in Grandpa's name, that's called a breach of fiduciary duty. I could be held personally liable. I could be removed. I could, in the worst version, be the one a court comes after. It isn't my money to move," I said. "Not won't, can't. There's a difference, and it matters." My mother heard none of it. What she heard was her daughter choosing paperwork over her own parents. "You always did love your little rules," she said. My father cleared his throat and said nothing, which is its own kind of answer. I told them I loved them. I told them there might be other ways to help that were actually legal if they'd let me look. The line went dead before I finished the sentence. I sat in my kitchen in town, 12 minutes from the farm, and across Brant's Mill from their place, and I felt the specific loneliness of being right in a family that hates being told so. I didn't know yet that being right was about to cost me everyone I had. Let me put you in the right places because in my family, geography is everything. I live alone in a small house on Sycamore in town. My parents live on the other side of Burt Mill in the brick ranch they've owned for 30 years. That's the house with the second mortgage, the house at stake. And the farm, Grandpa's farm, sits 12 minutes out on Route 19, empty now except for the furniture and the ghosts. 3 separate roofs. I want you to hold that because later it matters who was driving where and to whom. The foreclosure clock was real. 4 months behind on $9,000 is not a misunderstanding. It's a countdown. I understood why my mother was frightened. Fear like that doesn't make people kind. The night after that second call, I drove out to the farm anyway. I told myself it was estate business. Really, I just wanted to stand in the kitchen. I turned on the light over the sink, and there was the table, that oak table, the coffee ring catching the light like a watermark on an old letter. I put my hand flat on it. I could almost hear him saying my name. And standing there in the quiet, I had the feeling you get before a storm rolls over the fields. That low pressure in your chest, the certainty that something is coming, and the only choice you have is whether you've shut the windows in time. I started thinking about which windows I'd left open. The next morning, my mother started closing them for me from the inside. She called Wednesday with a different voice. Not the deciding voice, a colder one. "Where's Daddy's money, Odette?" No softness in it now. No Eddie, just my full name, the way teachers use it right before a punishment. I told her what I'd told her twice already, that the money was where it was supposed to be in the estate being handled properly, and that I'd be glad to walk her through every line whenever she wanted. "People are asking questions," she said. "What people?" "Family. They want to know why his accounts look so empty when you had the run of them." I felt the floor tilt a little. Empty. So someone had been looking at numbers, or talking about looking, and someone had decided the answer was me. "Mom, I said his accounts aren't empty. Every dollar that moved is documented and I can show you." "Don't show me," she said. "Show them if you've got nothing to hide." Then she hung up, and I sat there with my heart doing something I didn't like. I keep books so I know what an accusation does once it's loose in a family. It doesn't wait for evidence. It moves at the speed of a phone, mother to sister to cousin to in-law, picking up weight at every stop. I told myself I'd get ahead of it. I told myself the truth always wins. I was about to learn how slow the truth walks, and how fast a lie can run when 23 people want to believe it. That night, I did what I do when I'm scared. I went back to the records. Grandpa kept his reading glasses on the kitchen windowsill, the wire-rimmed ones with the bent left arm, and they were still sitting there, folded, 8 weeks after he'd last needed them. I left them where they were. It felt wrong to move them. I sat with his folders instead, and remembered something I'd half forgotten. 2 years back, Grandpa had asked me to drive him into the county seat to see a lawyer named Marion Voss. He wouldn't tell me why on the way there, just sat with his hat in his lap. On the way back, he said he'd set something up for the little ones, meaning the great-grandchildren, and that I shouldn't worry about it. I hadn't thought about it since, but sitting there with his folders, the phrase came back to me, and so did another one. Months before he died, on one of our last clear Sundays, he'd tapped that yellow pencil on the table and told me, "Keep every page, Eddie, even the ugly ones. Someday somebody's going to want to argue, and the one with the pages wins the argument." I'd thought he was being dramatic. Old men get that way about their papers. Now I understood he'd been doing the most loving thing he knew how to do, leaving me armor I didn't yet know I'd need. I just didn't know who I'd be fighting. By the next afternoon, I had a pretty good guess. My brother Wade showed up at my house Thursday, which he never does. He's 38, 2 and taller than our father, and he has a way of filling a doorway, like a man who's used to being believed. "We need to talk, Eddie," he said, already inside. He talked at me for 10 minutes about doing the right thing for once, about family, about how Mom was beside herself, and it was on me to fix it. The whole time. The seed corn clock on my wall, the free one the co-op hands out, the one I keep because it ticks loud and keeps me honest, counted off the seconds between his sentences. I let him finish. Then I said the same thing again. Estate executor can't. He stopped at the door on his way out, and for the first time he didn't look angry. He looked nervous. "You really want everybody digging through those accounts?" he said, and then he left. I keep books for a living, so I'll tell you what I told myself that night. Write down what's true, even when nobody wants to read it. If a relative ever made you the family villain just for saying no, you already know exactly how that kitchen felt. Stay with me. The dinner where they tried to corner me is coming, and I brought something to that table. Comment receipts if you've been there and hit subscribe so the ending finds you, because Wade's question stayed with me all night. Why would the guy with nothing to hide be afraid of digging? I couldn't sleep on that question. You really want everybody digging through those accounts? It's a strange thing to say if you're the one demanding justice. Innocent people don't fear the books. They beg for the books. They wave the books in your face. Wade had done the opposite. He'd warned me away from them, dressed up as a threat. I lay awake doing what I do, which is following a number to its home. There were a few times over the last couple of years I remembered now when Grandpa had asked me to leave a little room in the spreadsheet. When he'd written a check, I didn't ask about when he'd said only that's between me and Wade. I'd respected it because he was sharp and it was his money, but the shape of it was clearer now in the dark. My grandfather had been helping my brother quietly more than once. The next morning, I learned just how loud my mother's version had already gotten. The foreclosure notice had actually arrived at my parents' house. Renee, my cousin, told me she'd seen it on the counter when she dropped off a casserole. Real paper, real bank, real deadline. And in the same breath, Renee told me something that made my stomach drop. "Aunt Brenda's been saying you took Grandpa's money," she said, careful, like she was handing me something hot. "Is that I told her that didn't sound like you." I thanked her. I didn't ask what else was being said. I was about to find out it was already everywhere. My Aunt Carol called that evening. Carol is my mother's younger sister, 58, and she has appointed herself the family's conscience, mostly because she's the one who keeps the group chat. She opened gentle, which is how she opens when she's about to be anything but. "Honey, I just want to help everyone get past this," she said. "But I have to be honest with you. It doesn't look good. All those careful little spreadsheets of yours when the family's hurting. Family doesn't ask for receipts. Debt." There it was. The whole accusation folded into a saying you'd cross-stitch on a pillow. Family doesn't ask for receipts. As if the most loving thing I could have done was keep no records at all and let the money walk off in the dark. I wanted to tell her that receipts are exactly how you protect the people you love. I didn't. I said I understood she was worried and that everything would be clear soon. "I hope so," she said in a tone that meant she hoped the opposite, because the opposite made a better story. After that, the town got colder by the day. The woman at the seed co-op, who's known me since I was in pigtails, suddenly had trouble meeting my eyes. A man at the gas station I've waved to for years didn't wave back. I started to understand that somewhere in a chat I couldn't see, I had already been tried. I just hadn't been told the charges. So I decided to go read the evidence myself, the real evidence, the kind that doesn't gossip. I drove back out to the farm on Saturday with 2 empty accordion folders and a thermos of coffee. The kitchen was cold. I turned on the light over the sink, sat down at the oak table, and spread Grandpa's bank statements across it. And I noticed, the way you notice a splinter, that I'd laid the stack right over the pale coffee ring, like the table had been waiting to hold them. I started building what I should have built weeks earlier, a complete accounting. Every account, every balance, every transaction for the last 3 years, where the money came in, where it went, and why. It's slow work. It's the work I'm best at. Hours in the kitchen, dark outside the window. I lifted a divider in his main folder and found a thin stack of papers I hadn't cataloged. Handwritten across the top of the first one in Grandpa's careful hand promissory note. Below it, an amount, a date, and a signature that wasn't Grandpa's. I knew that signature. I'd watched it scrolled on Christmas cards my whole life. Wade. I sat very still. There were several of them paperclip-ipped together, spanning 2 years. I didn't add them up that night. I told myself I was tired, that the numbers would keep. The truth is, I was afraid of the total. The way you're afraid of a doctor's voice before he says the word. I slid them into the folder and drove home with my hands too tight on the wheel. I added them up the next morning at my own kitchen table. I wish I'd been standing. The number was worse than I'd let myself imagine. $46,000. That's what my brother had borrowed from our grandfather over 2 years in pieces. 8,000 here, 12 there, a final 11 the spring before Grandpa's mind started to go. Every loan documented, every note signed, not $1 repaid. I read them twice, then a third time, because I needed it to be a mistake. It wasn't. To make out the faint pencil on the last one, I reached for Grandpa's reading glasses. I'd finally brought them home, telling myself I'd keep them safe and slid them on. Through his lenses, the world went soft at the edges and sharp in the middle, the way it must have looked to him at this very table. And I saw something I'd missed. On that last note, his signature wavered. The howl that had always been so firm and level had gone shaky. A man's hand fighting his own body to do one more honest thing before he couldn't. He'd loaned Wade money he probably knew he'd never see again. And he'd written it down anyway, because the pages were the point. Suddenly, the whole picture turned over in my mind like a card. The empty accounts my mother kept describing weren't empty because of me. They were lighter because Grandpa had been quietly carrying my brother for years, and because his care at the end hadn't been free. The money hadn't vanished. It had a paper trail a mile long, and every footprint on it belonged to somebody other than me. I just hadn't connected the last dot. By the time I did, my mother had already turned the family into a jury. My father came by Sunday alone, which was its own event. Roy Palmer is a quiet man who has spent 40 years agreeing with my mother in public and worrying in private. And he stood in my doorway, turning his cap in his hands like he'd come to confess something. For a second I thought he had. "Eddie," he said, "your mother's just scared. That's all this is. She's scared." I waited. I gave him every inch of room a person could need to say the next thing. The true thing. The thing I could see sitting right behind his eyes. He knew. He had to know. He'd watched Grandpa write those checks to Wade, too. He'd signed that second mortgage himself. He knew I hadn't taken anything. And for one held breath, I thought he was going to stand in my kitchen and say so. Then he put his cap back on. "You ought to just help her," he said, and turned for the truck. That was the whole near thing. A man who loved me and feared his wife more and chose the fear. I didn't chase him. I've learned that the hardest part of keeping things straight is doing it alone in the dark, while everyone who could vouch for you decides it's safer not to. That's my failing if you want one. I'd rather fix a problem with paper than drag my family into a room and make them look at it. I keep my distance and let the records speak. The trouble with letting records speak is that you have to get people in a room first. And my mother, it turned out, was about to put us all in one. The screenshot came Monday night from my cousin Renee. Just an image, no message at first, then 3 dots that appeared and disappeared while she worked up the nerve. It was the family group chat, 23 names along the top, aunts and uncles and cousins, and the in-laws who marry into a family like ours and inherit its grudges. I'd been removed from it weeks ago, apparently. I hadn't even known. And there, in a green bubble, was my Aunt Carol's contribution to my reputation. Hal's accounts are nearly empty. Odette had control of everything. POA, executor, all of it. Do the math, people. Below it, a row of reactions. A crying face from one uncle, a folded hands prayer from another, and a small red heart, the kind you tap when you agree, from a name I'd know anywhere. Mom. My mother had hearted the post that called her daughter a thief. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and read it maybe 10 times, and each time the heart got bigger. Do the math, people. Here's the thing she didn't know. I had done the math. I'd done it down to the penny. The math didn't say what Carol thought it said, but you can't paste a spreadsheet into a group chat you've been thrown out of. And even if you could, the people in it didn't want a spreadsheet. They wanted the story they already had, the one with a villain who kept careful little records. Renee's 3 dots finally turned into words. "I don't believe it," she wrote. For what it's worth, it was worth something. It was the only thing worth anything that week. I screenshotted the screenshot, saved it in a folder labeled with the date, and felt something in me go very calm and very cold. They'd already held the trial. They just hadn't bothered to invite the defense. Calm is a decision, not a feeling. I made it on the kitchen floor and got up. The first thing I did was call Marion Voss, the lawyer Grandpa had taken me to see 2 years before. She remembered him right away. The gentleman with the hat, she said, and she remembered what they'd built. An irrevocable education trust for his 4 great-grandchildren, funded and finalized, drawn up tight. I asked her the question that had been chewing on me. Could I just tell the family the numbers, end this tonight, post the truth where they'd posted the lie? She told me to slow down. As executive and trustee, I had a duty to account properly through a formal complete accounting, not scattered half numbers shouted into a group chat. If I started flinging selective figures around to win an argument, I could hand a real grievance to anyone who later wanted to contest the estate. The right way was also the slow way. Do it once, do it whole, do it on the record, she said. Then nobody can say you cherry-picked. It was maddening and it was correct. I couldn't dump the truth out fast. I had to lay it down right. So that's what I started doing. A true accounting. Every account, every invoice, every note bound and ordered so that a stranger could follow it. And then Marion said the thing that turned the whole month around. When it's done, she said, don't mail it to them. People don't believe paper that arrives alone. Get them in a room. Let them watch you open it. I knew exactly which room. I just didn't know yet that my mother was about to book it for me. 2 days later, my mother called. Sweet as pie, which is how I knew it was a trap. We're having a dinner, she said. Out at Daddy's this Sunday. It would have been his 80th, you know. The whole family is coming to remember him. A memorial supper in Grandpa's own kitchen on the birthday he didn't live to see. It sounded lovely. It was a courtroom with a casserole. Wade would be there loud. Carol would be there, righteous. 20-some relatives would be there, primed by weeks of green bubbles to watch the thief squirm. My mother wanted me cornered in front of all of them, where I'd either break down and fix it or refuse and prove I was guilty. Of course I'll come, I said. My grandfather taught me to keep every page, even the ugly ones. So when my mother set a dinner to put me on trial, I didn't reach for anger, and I didn't reach for excuses. I reached for a binder. If you've ever wished you could just let the truth speak for itself, stay with me, because Sunday is where it finally got to. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I set it on the table. She thought she was choosing the ground. She was. I just happened to know that ground better than anyone alive. It was the table where I'd learned to read a ledger under the eyes of the man who taught me. She called twice more before Sunday, each time sweeter, each time tightening the noose she thought she was looping. Just come ready to explain things to everybody, she said once. If your conscience is clear, honey, you've got nothing to worry about. There's a particular cruelty in that sentence when the person saying it has spent 3 weeks making sure your conscience is the only thing on trial. I told her I'd be glad to explain everything. I meant it more than she could have known. The second call, she let a little of the real plan slip. Carol's bringing the family. Everybody wants to hear it from you in person. Everybody in person. She was staging an audience the way you stage one when you're sure the show ends with the defendant in tears. I didn't argue. I've learned that when someone's building a stage for your humiliation, the worst thing you can do is tell them you've read the script. Let them build. Let them sell tickets. Just make sure that when the curtain goes up, you're holding the one prop they forgot to check for. I spent those days the way I spend tax season. Heads down, methodical, fueled by bad coffee. And every night I drove home from the farm, past my parents' brick ranch, the foreclosure notice glowing somewhere inside it like a coal. And I reminded myself that I wasn't doing this to win. I was doing it to be believed. There's a difference. Winning is loud. Being believed is quiet, and it lasts. By Saturday night, the binder was nearly done. By Sunday, it would be ready to do the talking I'd been too tired to do alone. A real accounting is just a story told in numbers. And like any story, it has to be in order, or nobody follows it. I built mine cover to cover. Section 1. Every one of Grandpa's accounts, opening and closing balances, 3 years out. Section 2. His care. 18 months in memory care after the fall, with the invoices to match, $71,000. Every statement stamped and dated, the price of keeping a proud man safe at the end. Section 3. The Education Trust. Marion's crisp legal pages, $6,000 set aside for 4 great-grandchildren, including, and I underlined this twice, WDE's own 2 kids. Section 4. The promissory notes. $46,000 loan to my brother, signed in his own hand, unpaid. And Section 5. The simplest math anyone ever did. 71 plus 60 plus 46. $177,000, accounted for to the dollar. None of it in my pocket. I called Marion and asked if she would come Sunday. Not to speak for me, just to stand in the room as the lawyer who drew the trust and confirm, if asked, that every page was real. She agreed. "One thing," she said before she hung up. "This is the strongest footing I can put you on. It won't stop someone from filing a contest if they're angry enough. It'll just make filing a mistake because a court will order the exact accounting you're about to read out loud, and it'll cost them to hear it twice." Strongest footing, not certainty. I held on to that honesty. It steadied me more than a promise would have. I closed the binder, ran my thumb down the spine, and went to bed early. Sunday came up gray and still, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. I didn't sleep much that last night, and not because I was afraid of the family. I was afraid of something smaller and meaner. Guilt. Not guilt for anything I'd done. Guilt for being the one he'd trusted. All week, a voice had been working at me. If Grandpa had just picked someone else, anyone else, the family wouldn't be cracking down the middle like a drop plate. I was the executive, so I was the fault line. That's the kind of thinking that has always been my weakness. I take on weight that isn't mine to carry. I'd rather hold the whole load alone than ask my family to share it, because asking feels like admitting I can't do it by myself. And somewhere along the way, I decided I always had to. It's why I do my fighting with paper instead of people. Paper never makes me beg. Lying there, I almost talked myself into the easy version. Pay the mortgage, eat the consequences, make it all go away, and let them think whatever they needed to think. It would have been the warm thing to do. It would also have been a lie that said I'd done something wrong, paid for with money that wasn't mine to spend, breaking the one promise I'd actually made to a dying man. Keep it straight, Eddie. I got up before dawn, made coffee, and sat with the binder until the kitchen turned blue with morning. By the time the light was full, the guilt had burned off like fog. What was left was the work, and the work was honest. I put on a plain gray sweater, the kind you wear when you don't want to be looked at, and I drove out to Route 19 to be looked at. Anyway, before I tell you about the dinner, let me give you what I had so you can watch it land the way they couldn't. Here's what my aunt told everyone to do, the math. So here's the math. My grandfather's main accounts held about $19,000 2 years before he died. By the time he passed, they held around 13. To my family, that drop of $777,000 had only one explanation, and her name was Odette. But money doesn't disappear, it relocates. And an honest set of books tells you the new address of every dollar. $71,000 had gone to his care, the safest, most expensive 18 months of his life. $62,000 had gone into a trust for the grandchildren of his grandchildren, locked away for college, his last act of faith in a future he wouldn't see. And $46,000 had gone, a slice at a time, into my brother's failing business and never come back. There was one more thing they didn't know. The piece that turned the whole accusation into a sad joke. Grandpa had kept a separate certificate of deposit, $95,000, untouched, and in his will, that exact account was left to his daughter, my mother, as a specific cash bequest. It had been sitting there the entire time, legally hers the moment the estate cleared, more than enough to save her house. All she'd ever had to do was ask me to read the will, instead of accusing me of robbing it. The answer to her prayers had my signature waiting on it, and she'd spent 3 weeks telling the county I was the devil. I folded that fact into the binder like a card up a sleeve. Sunday, I'd play at last. The cars started lining the lane along Route 19 by 4 o'clock. I recognized everyone. Carol's white SUV, my uncle's diesel that you can hear from a half-mile off. Renee's little hatchback parked off to the side like she wasn't sure she belonged. I parked last on purpose and carried the binder in against my chest like a casserole nobody asked me to bring. The farmhouse kitchen was full and warm and wrong. Too many people in a room built for two to do the books in. And there, in the middle of it all, the oak table, Grandpa's table, with the coffee ring catching the overhead light, sat now with my mother's good plates, as if a nice tablecloth could make this a supper instead of a sentencing. On the windowsill above the sink sat his reading glasses, the wire-rimmed ones, exactly where they'd lived for 40 years, because I'd brought them back out that morning and put them home. The seed corn clock ticked on the wall over the doorway, loud in the lulls, the way it had ticked through every Sunday of my childhood. Tick, tick, counting us down to something. The talk was bright and brittle. People hugged me with their arms, but not their eyes. Wade stood by the refrigerator with his arms crossed, holding court. Carol orbited the room, refilling glasses and dropping little remarks like seeds. My mother presided at the head of the table in Grandpa's chair and would not look at me directly. My father stood at the back near the door where he could leave. I set the binder on the counter, smoothed the gray sweater I didn't want anyone looking at, and waited for the woman in my grandfather's chair to begin the trial she'd been planning for 3 weeks. She got me alone first. Of course she did. She caught my elbow and steered me into the hall by the pantry, away from the others. Her grip warm and hard at once. "Listen, Eddie," she said fast and low. "We don't have to do this in front of everybody. Just sign something tonight. Say it was all a misunderstanding. Move enough to cover the bank, and I'll tell them it was a mix-up. I'll tell them you were never anything but good." A mix-up. That was the deal. Confess to a crime I didn't commit. Raid an estate I was sworn to protect. And in exchange, she'd graciously stopped telling people I was a thief. It was the most generous offer she knew how to make. And it was poison all the way down. I looked at my mother, really looked, at the fear under the fury, at a woman drowning who decided her own daughter was the rock she'd push under to climb out. And I felt for her. I did. But feeling for someone doesn't mean letting them rewrite the truth on your back. "No, Mom," I said. "Quiet. No heat in it. We're going to do this in front of everybody because everybody's the one you told." She flinched like I'd raised my hand, though my voice never rose at all. Then, "God help you," she whispered, and walked back out to her audience. I stood alone in the hall by the pantry for 1 breath. 2, the seed corn clock ticking through the wall. Then I picked up the binder from the counter where I'd set it, and I carried it to the table my grandfather taught me at, and I sat down in the chair beside the empty one that used to be his. My mother didn't wait for grace to be said. She stood up at the head of the table in Grandpa's chair, and the bright chatter died the way it does when everyone's been waiting for the real reason they came. "I think," she announced, "before we eat, the family deserves some answers." She let that sit. 20-some faces turned toward me. Some sorry, most certain. Carol set down her glass with a little click and folded her hands like a judge. Wade pushed off from the refrigerator. And then my mother said it. The line she'd been polishing for 3 weeks. The one I'd heard on the phone in private and now heard turned into a weapon in public. "Where's Daddy's money, Odette?" The kitchen went so still you could hear the clock. Tick, tick. Somewhere a chair creaked. My uncle wouldn't look at me. Renee's hand had gone to her mouth. My mother stood over me in the dead man's chair, and the whole family leaned in to watch me fall apart, or lie, or beg. I did none of it. I set the binder down on the table, square over the pale coffee ring, the worn spot where his mug had sat for 40 years, while he taught me to do exactly this. I rested my hand flat on the cover for a moment, the way I'd rested it on the bare wood the night the storm first rolled in. Then I looked up at my mother, calm as a Sunday afternoon, and I gave her the truest answer she would ever get from me. "I'll show you," I said. "I'll show all of you every dollar." And I opened the cover. I didn't stand. Standing is for people who need the height. I stayed in my chair beside the empty one, and I reached over to the windowsill and took down my grandfather's reading glasses, the wire-rimmed ones with the bent left arm, and I put them on. The kitchen tilted soft at the edges, the way it must have for him. Somebody made a small sound. Renee, I think through his lenses. I looked at the first page, and then I looked up at the room over the top of them, the way he used to look at me when he was about to make a point I'd remember. "You all heard my aunt say it," I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It came out level as a fresh poured foundation. "Do the math," she said. "So let's do the math together out loud. Because I kept every page. I let that land. I kept every page." The same words Grandpa had said to me at this table, handed back to the family that thought a careful woman was the same thing as a thief. Wade shifted his weight by the refrigerator. Carol's folded hands tightened. My mother stayed standing because she'd built the whole evening on the certainty that I had nothing, and she couldn't yet feel the floor moving under that certainty. I turned to the first tab. The seed corn clock ticked once into the silence, loud as a gavel, and in the calmest voice I owned, I began to read my grandfather's money back to the people who'd buried his memory under a lie. 2 years ago, I read Grandpa's accounts held $19,000. When he died, they held 13. A murmur moved through the room. There it was. The drop, the proof they thought they had. I let them have it for one breath. Then I turned the page. Here's where the rest went section by section. Stop me when I lie. Nobody stopped me. $71,000, I said, sliding the stamped invoices across the table so they could pass them hand to hand for 18 months of memory care. The fall, then the home, then the good place that cost more because it was safe. Every statement's here. He never wanted any of you to know how scared he got at night. Now you do. A couple of the aunts looked down. I turned the next tab. $6,000, I said, and laid Marion's crisp legal pages out flat into a trust. An education trust for his great-grandchildren. Your kids and your kids. And yes, Wade, your two as well. Locked away for college drawn up 2 years ago by the lawyer sitting in that chair by the door. Heads turned to Marion Voss, who nodded once, quiet and certain. He set it up so none of you could fight over it, I said. So it could only ever be spent on the kids. That's the man you think I robbed. The room had gone a different kind of quiet now. Not the hungry kind. The kind that comes when a story people were enjoying turns out to be about them. 71 and 60. $131,000 accounted for, photographed, notarized. That left one number. And the moment I reached for that tab, my brother stepped away from the refrigerator. "That's enough, Eddie," Wade said. His voice had a crack in it already. "Nobody needs to see every little $46,000, I said over him, still calm. And I laid the promissory notes on the oak table one at a time like cards. Loaned to Wade Palmer. Over 2 years, signed by Wade Palmer in his own hand. Not $1 repaid. The kitchen made a sound I'll never forget. A kind of collective intake. The air going out of my mother's whole case at once. The notes went hand to hand. People who'd been so sure an hour ago were now staring at my brother's signature. The same loops they'd seen on a 100 Christmas cards. "Those are private," WDE said. "Too loud now. The way men get loud when they're going under. That's between me and Grandpa. You had no right. I'm the executive. I said every debt owed to the estate is exactly my business. The estate's books say you owe it $46,000, Wade. They've said so the whole time. That's why you didn't want anybody digging. He slammed his hand flat on the counter. A glass jumped. You always thought you were better than us, he shouted. And there it was at last. Not me, yelling. Him. The man who'd filled my doorway like he was used to being believed, coming apart in our grandfather's kitchen while I sat in a borrowed pair of glasses and didn't raise my voice once. My mother had gone gray. She reached for the back of Grandpa's chair to steady herself. Wade, she said faint. Wade, what is this? And my brother, cornered, did the thing cornered people do. He looked at me with pure hate and said, She's twisting it. But the pages don't twist. That's the whole point of pages. I turned to the last tab, the one I'd been saving, and the room braced like it could feel another shoe about to drop. Carol found her voice first, because Carol always does. This is exactly what I meant, she said, shrill now, scrambling for the high ground sliding out from under her. Family doesn't ask for receipts, Odette. We don't do this to each other. I looked at my aunt over the top of Grandpa's glasses, and I gave her the only answer that sentence ever deserved. These receipts, I said quietly, are the only reason nobody in this kitchen is talking to a prosecutor tonight. Family doesn't ask for receipts. She'd used it to shame me for 3 weeks, and in one sentence, it turned into the thing that was protecting every guilty person in the room. If I'd kept no records, I went on, if I'd done it your way, no notes, no invoices, no trust, just trust me, then $46,000 would look like it walked off on my watch, and somebody would have a real case to make against me. The receipts are what keep this a family argument instead of a police report. Then Marion Voss spoke from her chair by the door, calm and dry as a deed. I drew that trust myself. She said, I've reviewed Ms. Palmer's accounting. It's complete and it's correct. She paused and looked around the room without unkindness. You're welcome to contest the estate. That is your right. I'll only tell you what it costs. A court will order an accounting, and it will be this exact accounting. Read aloud again under oath with everyone's lawyers billing by the hour. You've already heard it for free. Nobody moved. The threat of court, which my family had been holding over me like a hammer, had just been handed back to them with the receipt attached. The clock ticked, and my mother, white-knuckled on the back of the dead man's chair, finally let go of her case. My mother sat down, not in Grandpa's chair. She couldn't suddenly, as if it had grown too big for her. She pulled out a plain one along the side and lowered herself into it. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she looked at me directly. There was no apology in her face. There was something worse and more honest. The dawning understanding of what she'd done and to whom, and in front of how many people. The relatives weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Wade and at her. Renee had quietly moved to stand behind my chair, a hand on my shoulder, choosing her side out loud at last. My father stayed by the door, cap in his hands, having said nothing, having chosen again the silence that costs nothing in the moment and everything over time. I closed the binder. The sound of the cover settling was the loudest thing in the room. You all wanted to know where Grandpa's money went, I said. Now you know. It went to keep him safe, to send your children to school and to a brother who never paid him back. None of it went to me. I kept every page. I let it sit one last time, soft and final. He just hoped I hadn't. I didn't say that part out loud. I didn't have to. Wade was already gone out the back door into the dark off Route 19, the screen banging behind him. And in the kitchen, where a frightened woman had built a courtroom to break me, the only person who'd stayed calm from the first word to the last was the one she'd called a thief. I could have left it there. Part of me wanted to, but my grandfather didn't teach me to win arguments. He taught me to keep things straight. And keeping it straight meant telling my mother the whole truth, even the part that helped her. So I opened the binder one more time to the last tab. Mom, I said, there's something you never let me get to. I turned the page toward her. Grandpa left a CD, $95,000, separate from everything else. In his will, he left it to you. A specific bequest in your name the day the estate clears. Her head came up slow. It's been sitting there the whole time, I said gently now because there was no need to be anything else. More than enough to cover the bank. I couldn't move it early. That's the law, not me being cruel. But it was always coming to you. All you ever had to do was ask me to read the will instead of telling the county I robbed it. She put a hand over her mouth. I closed the binder for the last time. I'll walk it through probate the right way, I said. It's the strongest footing I can give you, and it's a good one. It won't erase what got said in that group chat. It just refuses to make it true. The clock ticked. Marion gathered her coat, and I sat for a moment longer in the chair beside my grandfather's, in a kitchen full of people learning too late, the price of doing the math wrong. It didn't end with hugs. Real life rarely gives you that. It ended with people putting their coats on quietly and not knowing where to look. Renee drove me back to town that night so I wouldn't have to be alone on Route 19, and she stayed for tea, and she said the thing I'd needed to hear from anyone for 3 weeks. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. That was enough. It was more than enough. The group chat went silent. Carol had nothing left to post once the math came back with her sister's name and her nephew's signature all over it. A few relatives texted me in the days after, awkward and ashamed, and I answered them kindly and briefly because I'm not built to hold a grudge the way some people are built to hold a phone. Wade didn't call. He still hasn't. The $46,000 is a debt to the estate now on the books where it always was, and what he does about it is between him and a probate court. My mother took the bequest. $95,000 cleared probate. The second mortgage got paid, and the brick ranch is hers and my father's free and clear. She has never once said she's sorry, but she did call weeks later, and after a long silence she said, "You really did keep it all straight, didn't you?" It wasn't an apology. From my mother, it was as close as the climate allows. I told her the same thing I'll tell you. Then I set one boundary, the only one that mattered. If she ever wanted to talk to me about money or anything else, she could do it to my face. Not in a chat I'm not in. When the estate finally closed, the family let me take one thing from the farm before the rest was sold. I took the oak kitchen table. It sits in my house on Sycamore. Now, in the corner by the window where the light comes in, the pale coffee rings still worn into the wood where his mug sat for 40 years. Every Sunday after lunch, I do my client's books there with his wire-rimmed glasses folded on the sill within reach, and the seed corn clock ticking on my wall where I moved it. My mother and I are cordial. We are not close, and I've stopped pretending we will be, which turns out to be its own kind of peace. I send a card on her birthday. She sends one on mine. Some families heal loud all at once in a tearful reunion. Mine healed quiet in small, careful increments, the way you pay down a debt, a little at a time on the record, with nobody pretending the balance was ever zero. Keeping the books was never really about the money. It was about refusing to let the truth get rewritten by whoever happened to be yelling the loudest, and learning the hard way that saying no to your family isn't the same thing as stealing from them. That's my story. One phone call, one binder, and a table my grandfather taught me to keep honest. If this reminded you that saying no isn't the same as stealing, and that the truth keeps far better records than gossip ever will, take that as your sign to keep your own pages, even the ugly ones. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.